Good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here today. A little bit strange to come to talk about amphibians and reptiles because it's very cold for them now and unlikely to be seen this time of year. But hopefully today, and hopefully y'all can hear me okay, I'll give you a crash course on the amphibians and reptiles of Illinois and talk a little bit about conservation efforts that are going on in the state. I guess to prime the pump a little bit, I think it's important to unpack that I have an entire course devoted to this subject, and so fitting everything in an hour is a challenge, but I feel up to it and looking forward to doing a speed run through the amphibians and reptiles of Illinois. As Elizabeth mentioned, I teach herpetology at the University of Illinois, which is the study of creeping things, and you'll begin to see this as a bit of a theme of some interesting connotations associated with amphibians and reptiles. Some of you may fear them or be curious about them. Some of you might have witnessed persecution of them. I am fascinated by them, and hopefully by the end of our time tonight, I'll be able to share that fascination with you as we see this diversity of Illinois. But it's really going to be rooted in the study of herpetology, which, to prime the pump a little bit, goes back a long ways. Aristotle was actually one of the first scientists to start to unpack the amphibians and reptiles, and Aristotle did a ton of work describing them with particular affinity for chameleons and crocodilians. Had a lot of access to those. But after Aristotle's early work, it was 18 centuries before anyone else picked up the study of amphibians and reptiles. And Linnaeus was the one that took up that challenge. And so obviously you're likely familiar with Linnaeus's work on cataloging all of the biodiversity that he could find. And so it was an immense undertaking, this task to describe and define and name the amphibians and the reptiles in these other groups. Linnaeus did that. He lumped them together and also had some other interesting commentary to pair along with it. And we'll see this trend over time with some negative connotations associated with these creatures. And Linnaeus wrote in Systema Naturae, "These foul and loathsome animals are abhorrent because of their cold body, pale color, cartilaginous skeletons, filthy skin, fierce aspect, calculating eye, offensive smell, harsh voice, squalid habitation, and terrible venom." And so their creator has not exerted his power to make many of them. And so our leading scientists at the time working with these creatures were reviled by them. And this certainly has followed amphibians and reptiles into modern times, even amongst the herpetologically inclined. So for example, in the Conant Collins Field Guide to Western Amphibians and Reptiles, they start off their description of the common snapping turtle as both ugly in appearance and disposition. Myself and my field assistants here would disagree with that statement, but nonetheless, there's this history of some, I guess, herpetological malfeasance by our scientists and how they think about and describe the amphibians and reptiles. And I think it's completely wrong. I think they're beautiful creatures, and hopefully we'll show you why. But it's very interesting that there was a group of guide books that were put out in the 50s called the Golden Guide series, and one talked about amphibians and reptiles. Reptiles specifically, it said, as a group, they are neither good nor bad, but are interesting and unusual, although minor of importance. If they should disappear, it would not make much difference one way or the other. What's interesting about this, as you'll note, the second name is the author on this Golden Guide series, Smith, which was Hobart Muir Smith, UIUC professor of zoology from 1947 to 1968, the University of Illinois Museum of Natural History curator from 1947 to 1968. Dr. Smith described over 100 amphibian and reptile species, published over 1,600 scientific papers, most of them on amphibians and reptiles, and 26 books. He is, again, from the U of I, one of the most published herpetologists of all time. And yet, he viewed them as if they weren't around, it wouldn't make much difference. And so even amongst our herpetologists, there's this history of revulsion of these incredible creatures. But it begs the question that why should we care about amphibians and reptiles despite this long history, particularly in Western Judeo-Christian cultures and the scientific community? And I think it's really important that we do pay attention to them. First, amphibian reptiles are incredible model organisms. They have been used across a wide variety of scientific studies, from papers on evolution to conservation, epidemiology, ecology, physiology, developmental biology. We have learned a lot about our world by studying amphibians and reptiles, so they make great research organisms. Second, amphibians and reptiles provide critical ecoservices. These are these benefits that we as humans receive from the natural world. And there's a number of different categories, and I won't be able to unpack them all. That's really not why you came here tonight. You want to hear about these awesome critters. But nonetheless, they do provide these incredible services, from small mammal and disease control through their predation of things, as a food source, through medicine, cultural significance. There are just a number of categories of ecosystem services where amphibians and reptiles, unbeknownst to many, play critical roles. And so they're very important to have around and to provide that sort of value to our world. And again, they're culturally significant. Many cultures revere amphibians and reptiles, use them in their ceremonies as symbols of good things to come. In others, they're reviled. But we look back over the history of the United States, and particularly rattlesnakes are certainly a key part of our heritage, of our folklore, of integral Americana. And so these animals have been important as we established our country. And so I think it's important to recognize that. Now, all that said, we're going to strap in and do a speed run through all of the amphibians and reptiles in Illinois. Some of these you may have seen or heard, many may not have. These tend to be secretive, cryptic animals that you don't necessarily see frequently, but they're out there and throughout the state. And I will reiterate what Elizabeth mentioned at the outset. Really interesting herpetological diversity here in Illinois, in large part because of the span of the state. So 6 degrees of latitude that Illinois crosses that include a number of major ecoregions. So eastern deciduous forest, the southern Gulf coastal plain, western Great Plains, the Ozark uplift. And so as you have the stratification, as you move from the southern tip of the state to the northern end of the state, there's a wide array of niches for these amphibians and reptiles to persist in. And so we have remarkable diversity here in the state that you can see throughout Illinois. So let's go. We'll start jumping into it. We'll start just an overview. I'm sure many of you are familiar with amphibians and reptiles, but if not, we have some just general characteristics that we'll think about. For amphibians, they have moist, permeable skin with 2 glands. So all amphibians have a mucus gland, again, to keep that skin lubricated, to facilitate gas exchange across it. But they also have a set of poison glands. And so all amphibians are poisonous. Varying levels of toxicity or lethality, but we have to recognize that this is one of their characteristics. They are intimately tied to water, and so their eggs that they lay have permeable egg membranes, and so to avoid desiccation, they're laid in and around water oftentimes, so they're constrained to moist habitats. Most undergo metamorphosis. There are some exceptions, but they do typically have an aquatic larval phase and then a more terrestrial adult phase. We've got 2 groups here in the state, although there are 3 in the world. We won't get into the third because there are none here in Illinois. But ultimately, at the end of the day, we've got 43 species of amphibians in Illinois. Reptiles, on the other hand, much less bound to water. And so they have scaly, impermeable skin. They have thick-shelled eggs, allowing them to sever that tie to aquatic habitats evolutionarily, to lay their eggs in dry or more arid places. Can be found all over the place in a number of different habitats. We see the loss of that sort of larval phase. They no longer have that. They're direct developers, so they hatch. They look just like their parents. And we've got 3 groups in the state: turtles, lizards, and snakes, and 62 total species, believe it or not. So we'll start with the amphibians. 5 families in Illinois, 23 species. Some are very common in places with people, and I'll talk about those as I go through these. I will note, and I'm not going to be covering a lot of this tonight, but more often you won't see, particularly the frogs and the toads, you'll hear them. And so you could spend a lot of time learning the calls of the frogs of Illinois, which is often a great way to identify them. And hopefully in a couple months here, we'll be hearing them in our neighborhoods. But just bear in mind that less frequently seen than they are heard oftentimes. But nevertheless, these are some of our amphibians, and we'll kind of go through all of them. The first group being the true frogs. These are often your fairly aquatic, strong swimming, strong jumping frogs, very much look like a prototypical frog. I would guess that there is one individual frog on this slide that many, if not all of you have seen, but we'll get to that in a minute. But the first frog we'll introduce tonight is the crawfish frog, found in outlier prairies of southern Illinois. It's a fairly large frog. You can see in the image, it's got some dark blotches with light reticulations within. It's heavily spotted on its back. It has a white belly. And it's listed as a species in greatest need of conservation in the Illinois Wildlife Plan. And so I'm going to try and identify throughout the talk tonight the different species that are of conservation concern or have protections afforded by the state of Illinois. And so in the Wildlife Action Plan, this is one of the frogs that is afforded protection. And efforts are ongoing for all species of greatest need of conservation to develop and enact strategies and policies to protect them. This being the first, the crawfish frog. Next, we have the plains leopard frog. You'll see in the ensuing slides, we've got a number of these leopard frogs. They're kind of spotted like a leopard, hence its common name. The plains being one that was formerly widespread in the Grand Prairie marshlands, but as habitats have been lost or converted to agriculture, a lot of these habitats have also gone away. And so we see fewer of these over time. But again, inhabitant of these prairie marshlands, it's got dark spots and broken folds. When I say that, I mean, as you look at this line that runs down from the back of the eye, you'll see a break right here. It's a dorsolateral fold, and this is a common way we can use to identify this species and not confuse it with other similar leopard frog species. It's thought to be not particularly abundant at any locality in the state, so they're pretty patchily distributed. Again, more likely to be heard than seen, but it is another one of our true frog species. Next is the bullfrog, which I suspect many, if not all of you, have probably seen. Common in wetlands, certainly here in Champaign-Urbana. I see these down on the streams in town all over the place. So very common, very large, robust frog species. So Illinois' largest frog, in fact. It's big, it's green, it's abundant statewide, known for its big booming call that you typically hear late in summer. Interesting thing about the bullfrog is that outside of its native range, it's become a pest species. They can be quite voracious predators as larvae. Their tadpoles get very large. They spend an entire year in the water, so they'll overwinter and can be incredibly devastating outside their native range as an invasive species. But they are in fact native to Illinois, and I suspect many of you have seen them before. Continuing through the true frogs, we have the green frog, which is very similar to the bullfrog in appearance. Its tympanic membrane is a bit smaller, has a distinctly different call, doesn't reach the large size of the bullfrog, but typically is olive brown or green with dim black spots on its back, and it's super abundant, particularly in northern Illinois, but also in the Shawnee Hills, eastern Illinois, and the middle Mississippi border division. So an incredibly common frog here in Illinois. Pickerel frog, less common in my opinion. This is one of the few frog species that I've not seen in Illinois. And part of that is because of the habitat requirements that it has. It really prefers cool, high quality waters. So a place with little to no pollution, clear, cool, fast flowing waters. And so that need to be tied to very clean, very clear water limits where it occurs in the state. Nonetheless, it does look like many of our leopard frogs, but it has two rows of blocky spots in the back. So you can see those running down the dorsal side. And it too, again, due to the degradation of water quality in the state, is listed as a species in greatest need of conservation here in Illinois. Moving along, we next have the northern leopard frog. Pardon me. Again, another spotted leopard type looking frog. It's restricted to the northern third of Illinois. It's got irregular blotches on the back. So unlike the pickerel frog with boxy blotches, it's got more round or oval. And where it does occur in the upper 1/3 of the state, it can be incredibly abundant and widespread. Wherever there's water, you're likely to find northern leopard frogs. Continuing with the true frog, the southern leopard frog will come as a shock to you, but tends to be found in the southern 2/3 of the state. So tends to not be encountered alongside the northern leopard frog. But again, another medium-sized, like tan to green to brown, or mixed green and brown frog. Again, common throughout southern 2/3 of the state. Next up is the wood frog. It is a forest-dwelling frog. You can see it's got a dark banded mask on there. One of the coolest things about the wood frogs is that on a night like tonight, they are incredibly freeze tolerant. In fact, they can super cool. And so freeze, they'll mobilize glycogen and other things to the interstitial spaces to act as a sort of antifreeze to keep ice crystals from forming and destroying their cells. And so they can tolerate extremely cold conditions and have a really broad northern distribution as a consequence. You can see it throughout mature forests in Illinois. But it is listed as a species of greatest need of conservation in the Wildlife Action Plan. That is going to bring us through the true frogs. We'll move on to the next group, perhaps my personal favorite, the tree frogs, family Hylidae. So these are, you might think with the name, arboreal species, but in fact, there are some that are not. We'll start with some arboreal species and move on to other less arboreal ones. You know, the real distinguishing characteristic amongst the tree frogs are that they have expanded discs on their toe pads. And so this allows them to climb substrates, to have that more arboreal lifestyle. And that's a common thread across all of these tree frogs, is those enlarged toe discs. And we have, you know, four true tree frogs here. The first being the bird voice tree frog. So called because its call sounds like a singing bird, interestingly enough, but it's a small grayish brown or green tree frog with a dark X or star-shaped mark in the middle of the back. It's restricted to extreme southern Illinois in bald cypress and tupelo swamps, but they can be found in fairly abundant numbers in those places. It is listed as threatened in Illinois, so something to be mindful of, but it's a wonderful little frog. The green tree frog is next. You'll see where it gets its name from its bright green coloration with some yellow flashing down the side. Can have gold splatters on it. Absolutely beautiful frog species that you can often find in southern Illinois on leaves in these positions that you see them in here. They tend to prefer to be near water, so you'll find them in brushy borders of cypress swamps, floodplain sloughs, cattail marshes, and lakes in extreme southern Illinois. And they can be incredibly abundant in the dense bald cypress tupelo stands of southern Illinois. You can see a lot of these. The largest of the three tree frog species here, four tree frog species here in Illinois. Very cool frog if you're ever down in southern Illinois. And next is the Cope's gray or gray tree frog. This is an interesting species complex in which there are two species that are only discernible by either finding their chromosome number and doing molecular work, or listening to their mating call. So there's variation in trilling that's baked into their genome that allows you to identify them, but otherwise they're indistinguishable by eye. You can't tell them apart. They have incredibly variable color pattern from gray to brown to this green color that you see here. And it can change, interestingly enough. And so they're able to mobilize chromatophores and change color during the course of even a given day. So kind of a chameleonic little tree frog species. And it is common and abundant throughout Illinois. This is a species that you can hear calling, at least where I live in Savoy, hear it calling in the summertime. Their breeding period tends to start around June, July. And you can hear the gray tree frogs calling at that time, and you can find them in neighborhoods right here in Champaign, Urbana. So one that you might find hanging out by underneath the light on front of your house at night, munching away on the insects that come to visit the lights. So it can be fairly common here. But we'll move away from the arboreal species of tree frogs to some of the other ones, like the Blanchard's cricket frog here, which is another fairly small frog species. It's got warty skin. Still has those enlarged toe pads, but relatively small compared to other tree frog species. And it has a dark triangle between their eyes. You know, they were once widespread and quite common, but as you move to the northern part of the state, they are declining. Again, this is often associated with water quality issues. So where we have water pollution, we tend to see the loss of these species. But I do see these from time to time in the area. You can see them, you can hear them, especially in our area. Just like the spring peeper, which can be fairly common throughout the state, except in Grand Prairie, and can be locally abundant where they're found. This is one that I see quite frequently. Has large toe pads compared to Blanchard's cricket frog, and a dark X on its back with a narrow band in between the eyes. You can sort of see it in that picture there. Next, the Illinois chorus frog. This is a stout toad-like frog species with a mask-like stripe from the snout to the shoulder, dark markings between the eyes. This is a sand prairie endemic, so they burrow down into that sand, come out when it rains, and so it requires sandy soils and substrates. And those have been largely turned over for agriculture, and so they're listed as threatened in the state of Illinois. And this is one of the species that I mentioned. There's been a lot of conservation effort to, restore habitats for these species for Illinois chorus frogs. And in part, that's because of its listing as threatened in the state. It opens up opportunities to try and find areas that they once inhabited, perhaps purchase the land and restore it for the species. And it can be sort of the flagship species for the sand prairie restoration. So one where there's been a lot of effort, not only to understand its ecology, its biology, and its conservation, but to do shovel-ready work to make sure it's got habitats in the state. Continuing with the tree frogs, we've got another group of small tree frog species, and they're the trilling chorus frogs, upland, boreal, and western chorus frog. Three species that are largely indistinguishable except by color genetics, and this has been a common thread so far. But in general, they all have three dark stripes in the back, a white stripe on the upper jaw that you can see with each of them, small toe pads, and no webbing between their toes. They're widespread and very common. It's a frog species I see frequently here in sort of the Champaign, Urbana metropolitan area. Can be heard throughout Illinois in spring. They do really well in urban areas, so incredibly common small frog group. We'll move on to the toads and the spadefoot toads. So somewhat distantly related groups, but we're going to lump them in together here. And the first is going to be the American toad. And when you see these, which many of you probably have, they have 1 to 2 large warts in each dorsal spot. So the spots on their backs have 1 or 2 warts in them. They have enlarged warts on the lower leg and pronounced cranial crests. I'm not sure if you can see my arrow here, but these lines here, these are those crests on the top of the head. And they're found in virtually all forests and prairies in Illinois, as well as urban and ag areas. They are widespread and abundant. Here in Champaign, if you find a toad in your yard, it is an American toad, and I see them frequently, and we'll get back to that here in a minute. We also have Fowler's toad, which is a little bit different in that instead of the 2 spots on the, or 2 warts on the dorsal spots, you've got 3 or more small warts. The cranial crests are low and less pronounced, so a little bit less distinct than the American toad. Inhabits flooded fields, ditches, and other aquatic habitats. It's common in the southern half of Illinois and along the Illinois and Mississippi rivers. Next up, we have the eastern spadefoot toad. It has a vertical pupil, large black digging spade under the heel of the hind feet. These are highly fossorial digging frogs, toad species. Fascinating aspect of their ecology. Their breeding is a sort of massive engagement where they're triggered by thunderstorms, and so they can sense thunder rumbling through, and as spring thunderstorms come through, that will cause them to dig up out of the soil, find their breeding pool, and aggregate there in very large, very loud breeding aggregations. And then after the rains pass, they go back underground for the rest of the year. So highly fossorial, very difficult, rare to see, very secretive. And so we really don't know much about its status in Illinois. We know it occurs here in the southern tip of the state, but hard to pin down what sort of numbers we're talking about with the population. But one thing I did mention, hopefully you all can hear this, it's often easier to hear frogs and toads than to see them. And so this is from right here in Savoy, Illinois, a breeding aggregation of American toads, something we'll all be hearing hopefully in a couple of months here. I don't know about you, but that sound certainly reminds me of spring, and I'm very much looking forward to hearing it soon. There we go. Next up, last but not least amongst the frogs and the toads is another very secretive amphibian species, the eastern narrow-mouthed toad. It's a very small amphibian with a pointed head and a fold of skin behind the eyes, and it's found in moist areas with abundant cover. I think one of the things that's interesting about the narrow-mouthed toads is that they're myrmecophages, so they feed exclusively on ants, and that pointed snout very much designed to do that job. Like I said, very secretive, spend a lot of time undercover. They call underwater, and they're threatened in Illinois with the note that they're a bit data deficient. And so we just don't know a lot about the eastern narrow-mouthed toad in the state. That brings us through the anurans. Now we'll move into the caudates, the tailed amphibians. And we've got 6 families to think about here, and 20 species maybe here in Illinois, and I'll touch on that caveat here momentarily. With the first one up, the hellbender, perhaps the most well-known, I guess, salamander species. You know, the hellbender's plight in North America has been well documented. They like cool, high-quality, clear streams. We've dammed those up, we've polluted them, and so they're listed in the Endangered Species Act, and a lot of work has been done to try and protect these species. Some of you may have heard the kerfuffle a couple of years ago where J.K. Rowling's called them a snot otter. That is one of their nicknames because when you take them out of the water, they do have this sort of loose, wrinkly, slimy skin. Very large salamander species, certainly the largest salamander species in Illinois. It's fully aquatic. It doesn't leave the water. It's there year-round. And again, clear, cool, fast-flowing stream inhabitant. It really needs large rocks that it hides under. The males are territorial, and so will guard those big, flat rocks at the bottoms of these fast, cool streams. It's endangered in Illinois. It's possibly extirpated. It's been many years since one has been seen. And if I'm remembering correctly, many of the records that we have of hellbenders in the state of Illinois actually come from some of our border waters. And so status in the state is certainly uncertain. But it's a remarkable, remarkable animal. We'll stick with the fully aquatic ones, and the mud puppy is up next. It's a very interesting salamander species. It's got bushy external gills, 4 toes on the hind feet, a dark white stripe running through the eye. Again, fully aquatic. It's inhabiting lakes, ponds, rivers, and large creeks, though it does prefer clear water. It is threatened in the state of Illinois, but it is historically found statewide. Again, water pollution has restricted some of these ranges, but used to have a really broad distribution throughout the state of Illinois. Oftentimes found by people fishing. We'll catch these with hook and line. So that's where we see a lot of them show up. Next, we have another fully aquatic species, the lesser siren. It has external gills just like the mud puppy. It's a bit smaller, longer, more slender, less robust than the mud puppy. It's found in aquatic, but it tends to be nocturnal, so coming out at night in ditches, swamps, lowland ponds, and sloughs throughout Illinois. Can be quite common in southern Illinois and in the Illinois and Wabash rivers. It's infrequently seen, however, and so it's possibly widespread, and we have some evidence from our area that suggests that. So in 2012, this photo was taken by Danville of a heron eating a lesser siren, and it was previously unknown to occur at that location, but nevertheless there was a siren photographed here being eaten by a heron. And I really like my colleague Chris Phillips' quotation here. It goes to show you there's still surprises out there for herpetologists in the Midwest. And so sirens could be found in more places than we know. They're just so secretive and nocturnal that it's difficult to sample them. So we'll move out of the water onto land, and we'll start with the eastern newt. So this is a true salamander. The true salamanders tend to be known for their extremely potent poisons. Their glands produce very potent poison in some species. But here we have the eastern newt, which is native to Illinois. I really like that it has this triphasic life cycle. So you'll see the 2 images on the left are of this sort of teenage stage, the eft stage. They have an aquatic larval stage, but also this terrestrial F stage, and then they'll metamorphose. The adults go back into the water. You see that dorsally flattened tail to make them excellent swimmers, and they become fully aquatic again. So unique triphasic life cycle. They're really warty, granular skin, brown to red as efts, which are likely the ones you would see. Adults are green to brown with those dark red spots. Again, these bright red colorations that you see on the true salamanders is a warning sign, right? And so predators beware, I pack a potent venom poison punch. The range of the eastern salamander in Illinois is bisected by the Prairie Peninsula. It's similar to the spotted salamander, which we'll see later. Super common in southern Illinois, where swamps, breeding ponds, and wooded habitat persists. Its historical range in northern Illinois has become a bit reduced, again, because it doesn't have these habitats to utilize. Moving next to the lungless salamanders, an amazing group of salamanders. Like the name implies, they don't have lungs. Respiration occurs entirely across the skin membrane. We've got a number of species here in Illinois, and what I find fascinating about the lungless salamanders is that, where you can find these animals, they can often occur in extremely high biomass, and so there's thousands of these animals patrolling the leaf litter, hiding under logs, under rocks, where they can be found throughout the state. So it's a pretty amazing group that few of us have probably seen before. The first we'll talk about is the spotted dusky salamander, pictured here. It's got a pale diagonal line from the corner of the jaw. It really likes these cool spring-fed headwater streams in Pulaski County. So again, needs clean, clear, cold water. And we see that that's a common thread amongst the amphibians, that those who have those requirements tend to be threatened or endangered in Illinois because those habitats just aren't as widely available as they once were. So fairly rare to see the spotted dusky salamander. Not such the case with the southern two-line salamander, this yellow tan beauty with two dark stripes that it gets its name from down the back. Can be found near rocky brooks, spring seeps, and sprig-fed streams in mesic forest. This is one that I frequently encounter over in Vermilion County, so more widespread throughout the state, can be locally abundant along the Kankakee River, the eastern Grand Prairie, and the eastern Shawnee Forest, which really is kind of our stronghold for amphibians and reptiles in Illinois. So a little bit more common, more widespread, certainly than the spotted dusky. Next, we have the long-tailed salamander, this beautiful orange salamander, yellow to orange. It's got a long tail with dark vertical bars. Again, see a recurring thread theme amongst the Plethodontidae salamanders. Inhabits near cool streams and spring seeps and forests with rocky uplands. Can be locally abundant but patchily distributed along the Mississippi River uplands. Continuing forward, you might think that this is the same animal, but it's not. I assure you, this is the cave salamander, very similar in appearance to Longicauda, but lacking those black tail bars. You can see it's got some speckling down the tail, but lacks those bars. Can generally be found in twilight zones of limestone caves and crevices, and can be really locally abundant in the limestone regions of Shawnee Hills and the lower Mississippi border divisions. You can look in those limestone crevices. If it's moist enough, you'll tend to see them. They can be quite common in those areas. One of my personal favorites, the four-toed salamander, gets its name because it has 4 toes on its hind feet. It likes boggy pools, spring-fed ravines, and deciduous forests throughout the state of Illinois. It is threatened. It's likely a post-glacial relic. So it was kind of remnant of when part of Illinois was glaciated, and it's just kind of hanging on in these forests in Illinois. And so it is threatened. Some interesting work being done to understand more about them. Next up is the zigzag salamander. It's got that jagged reddish to yellowish back stripe, and again can be found in these moist rocky forests, generally in southern Illinois. But there are 2 records from strip mines near Danville. Just 2 spotty, scant records. A lot of questions as to why that might be, but perhaps was more widespread than we once thought. But certainly in southern Illinois can be incredibly abundant in the extreme south. Next up is the redback and leadback salamander. This is the same species, but 2 color phases that can often be found simultaneously. So you have the redback with the dark red stripe, but then you have uniform gray to black leadbacks. Again, genetically indistinct, just different color patterns. It's a terrestrial forest inhabitant of eastern Illinois forests, can often be found under logs, bark, sticks, and stones, and can be incredibly abundant where they're found, doing a lot of good work work on the forest floor, eating small invertebrates, contributing to nutrient cycling. So very cool Eastern Illinois forest endemic. And next up, we have the slimy salamander. Gets its name because its poison glands actually exude this very sticky substance as a defense mechanism. It's got this black to purple body with white or silver flecks, particularly on the sides, found throughout the forests of southern Illinois. And so the most commonly encountered woodland salamander in the southern half of Illinois, again, can be quite abundant in the habitats where you find it. Again, this is the thing that's fascinating to me about the plethodontid salamanders, is that they're just doing a ton of work that you don't see on that forest floor in terms of nutrient cycling. So very cool salamander species, in my opinion. So next, we're going to move on to the mole salamanders. These are not lungless, and we'll start off with Jefferson salamander. This is a long salamander species with a dark body and blue flecks along the side. It really likes those upland deciduous forests, beech maple in particular, in extreme eastern Illinois. They're threatened in the state, known to occur only in 2 counties. Now, I will say where they're found, they can be quite abundant, but again, relatively restricted distribution in the state. You might think this is deja vu all over again. It's the same species. No, it is not. This is the blue spotted salamander. Again, very similar to the Jefferson salamander. It's long with a dark body and blue flecks. But this one is a northern swamp, white oak, flatwoods, and music maple basswood forest inhabitant, especially in the northeastern morainal natural division. And it is listed as a species in greatest need of conservation. And finally, in this trio here is the silvery salamander, which is an absolutely fascinating species. It's a polyploid salamander, unisexual, that is the result of hybridization between Jefferson salamander and blue spotted salamanders. So looks very similar to its parental species. There's only females in our populations of silvery salamanders. They're polyploid. They like shallow vernal pools and mesic oak sugar maple beech forests of Vermilion County, and it's listed as endangered in Illinois, in large part because it just has an extremely restricted distribution, and it doesn't occur with its parental species, which is potentially causing some issues genetically for them. So certainly one that the state is concerned about. Continuing on, we have the spotted salamander, this absolutely beautiful animal. It's a very dark black salamander with yellow spots down the back. Again, found in deciduous forests with fishless vernal pools. Can be locally common in northern and southern Illinois, but is separated by prairie habitats because it is a forest inhabitant. But you know, it's something I certainly see frequently over in Vermilion County. Similarly is the marbled salamander, another, in my opinion, absolutely gorgeous animal. Again, that jet black background with the silver reticulations down its body, just a breathtaking animal. Similar to the spotted salamanders, likes those mesic forests, dry hillsides, and moist floodplains. Will often occur in the same habitats as spotted salamanders. And one of the interesting things I find about the marbled salamanders is that they are a little bit unusual in that they breed in late fall, early winter. And so as October winds down, the females will come down to these ephemeral pools. They'll go under a log or other cover, they'll lay their eggs, and they'll wait until the winter rains come, fill up the pond. The eggs will then hatch, larvae will spend the winter in the pond, and the adults will go off and burrow down underground to spend the rest of the winter. So interesting lifestyle. I guess it's a bit different than a number of the other amphibians that we've talked about today. They can be locally abundant, so not listed, not protected in the state. Next, we have the smallmouth salamander, nondescript, brown to gray. It's a little drab compared to the other, but certainly beautiful in its own way, and is quite widespread in poorly drained woodlands, prairie pastures, etc. Can even find it right here in Urbana. This is one that's done fairly well in our forests in town here, and they're common and widespread. Continuing through the mole salamanders, next we have the mole salamander. Again, this big, beefy, gray to brown with light flecks. Restricted to southern Illinois' bald cypress and tupelo swamps, and it's listed as a species in greatest need of conservation, again, in part due to that restricted distribution to these cypress swamps in southern Illinois. And finally, wrapping up the salamanders is the tiger salamander. You can see it kind of gets its name from the black and yellow stripe pattern that it has. Again, a very large, robust salamander species found in forests, woodland pastures, orchard prairies, and cultivated fields. Can be locally abundant, but does do rather poorly in urban and ag settings. So it's unlikely to be seen in places where there's been that heavy imprint of people. Rolling right along, we've got Illinois' reptiles, two major groups. We've got the turtles and the squamates, which is kind of a grab bag of all the lizards and snakes. Mostly in Illinois, we've got snakes, 38 species, so it's our most speciose group of reptiles. We've got 17 species of turtle but 6 lizard species. So pretty depauperate in terms of diversity of lizards, but we do have some, and we'll start with the turtles. Probably the most commonly seen one, certainly around central Illinois, is right here, the common snapping turtle. You may remember it from earlier, ugly in both disposition and appearance. It's got a long neck, sawtooth tail. Find a body of water, there's a good chance there's a common snapping turtle in there. They're extremely common, abundant. You see them all over the place in Illinois. Unfortunately, frequently killed on roads. They're crossing those roads to get to the proper place to lay their eggs, and so frequently hit by cars, unfortunately. So we're going to go from the most common turtle in the state of Illinois to perhaps the least common, which is the alligator snapping turtle. Believe it or not, yes, Illinois is home to the alligator snapping turtle. You can see it's got 3 prominent keels on the upper shell, so very distinctly different from the common snapping turtle with those 3 heavy keels. They like slow, turbid rivers in and among cypress and tupelo swamps. Again, critically endangered in the state, arguably the most rare turtle species. But interestingly enough, there's been a lot of work done by biologists at the Illinois Natural History Survey and the Illinois Department of Natural Resources to repatriate alligator snapping turtles to southern Illinois. And so there's been a program going on for many years where they're bringing in young alligator snapping turtles and releasing them and tracking them as they move about the river where they've been released. And in the process, it's brought to light one of, I think, my favorite herpetological stories in recent times. The researchers were down there tracking telemetered turtles, and to do this, they actually go snorkeling in the river and will find the turtles with the radio tags on them. And so they were tracking a turtle. Chris Phillips and Ethan Kessler here were tracking the turtles down the bottom of the river. Chris felt something that was absolutely a snapping turtle and pulled it out. And here you have a fully grown adult alligator snapping turtle. This was not one of the turtles that had been released. And so this is an ancient relic that has been living undetected in this river. And so while we thought we knew that they had been extirpated from Illinois, turns out not the case, and argues for how difficult it is to track some of these creatures. And so given that there are apparently some relic individuals in the state, I think it gives us some hope that the alligator snapping turtle is going to be able to hang on in southern Illinois into the future. So a nice little success story there. And we'll move away from the snappers to the pond and box turtles. Painted turtles being the first, this medium-sized yellow, very distinct bright markings on the head. I'm sure many of you have seen painted turtles throughout the area. Like shallow, quiet lakes, ponds, and backwaters, it's common and widespread. On the other hand, the spotted turtle, the small, distinct turtle with these bright yellow spots on its shell, found in shallow wetlands, sedge meadows, and wet prairies, only from extreme northeastern counties, is a state endangered species. So again, as these habitats have been lost, and we see the loss of this unique turtle species. Similarly, the Blandings turtle, perhaps the most famous of Illinois' turtle species. It's got an unmistakable yellow throat and chin. Again, likes marshes, prairie wetlands, sedge meadows, historically found through the northern half of Illinois, but it too is state endangered due to anthropogenic disturbance. So the loss of these wetlands, the turtles go right along with it, unfortunately. Northern map turtle, again, this triangular mark behind the eye, like slow-moving river reaches and backwaters, found throughout Illinois, but extremely abundant in northern Illinois, so one you might have seen in your travels up to the northern part of the state. The false map turtle looks very similar, but it tends to prefer mud-bottom rivers and backwaters and is locally common along the Mississippi and Illinois rivers. Probably introduced in Cook County, so one of these species that's done pretty well in modern times. We've got the Ouachita map turtle as well. It's got the broad yellow vertical bar behind the eye, spot under the eye and the lower jaw, really particular for sand and gravel bottom rivers. And as a consequence, we don't really know about much about its status and distribution. Seems like it's locally common, particularly in those sandy, gravel-bottomed parts of the Wabash, but pretty secretive, difficult to do an effective job of researching. The river cooter is a very large riverine species. It's got an can't speak tonight. It's got a pretty pattern on its shell. And can be found in backwater and oxbow lakes and big rivers. It's state endangered. The pond slider has a bright red stripe behind the eye. It looks very similar to the map turtles and the painted turtles, and it's found in most permanent water bodies in Illinois. It's incredibly common, incredibly widespread throughout the state. Continuing on, we'll move away from those fully aquatic turtle species to some of our more terrestrial. So we have the eastern box turtle here. They've got this keeled high dome shell without a discrete pattern of light lines. Again, terrestrial and forested habitats in Illinois. It's common and regularly encountered. See them on many walking trails around Champaign, Urbana, and in the area. So pretty common. Less so is its sister species, the ornate box turtle. It's got those highly patterned lines on the back of their shell. Can be found in central and northern Illinois sand prairies, also found in southern till plains and open fields, but they're threatened. They're uncommon to rare throughout much of its range in Illinois, so one you're unlikely to see. Next up is the mud turtles, Kinosternidae. These are interesting pond turtle species. The yellow mud turtle being fairly drab brown to green, rather nondescript, likes temporary to permanent ponds and backwaters of river and sand prairies and deep sandy soil. So again, liking those sandy habitats, which we don't have a lot of, and that is in part why it's listed as state endangered. We've got the eastern mud turtle, a small dark brown turtle species, relatively small compared to everybody else we've been talking about. Likes those shallow, stagnant, or slow-moving temporary aquatic habitats, so flatwoods, backwaters, oxbows, and cypress swamps, where it can be widespread and common. But because there's just not a lot of those habitats around, it is listed as a species in greatest need of conservation in Illinois. And finally, the eastern musk turtle has an unpatterned dark carapace, 2 light stripes on the head, likes mud-bottom water bodies, and is particularly common in southern Illinois, one that you'll see sunning itself quite frequently. Continuing on, we've got the softshell turtles. Here's the smooth softshell, and so hopefully you can see in the next picture the difference, but its shell doesn't have these spines or tubercles around it. Fairly large turtle, incredible swimmer. You can see with that body shape that it has really good fluid dynamics. So an outstanding swimmer, highly aquatic, river specialist. It's state endangered with populations declining throughout the state. And then next you have the spiny soft shell turtle. You can see the tubercles here along the front of the shell. Very similar to the smooth soft shell. Outstanding swimmer, highly aquatic turtle species, but it prefers mud-bottomed water bodies, including lakes and ponds, and is particularly common in the southern third of the state. So move on and very briefly go through the lizard species of Illinois. As I mentioned, extremely pauper. We don't have a lot of lizard diversity. We've got 4 families, 6 species, relatively restricted distributions in the state of Illinois. So first we'll have the slender glass lizard, often mistaken for a snake, but I assure you it is not. It's got 2 dorsolateral folds down the sides. Unlike snakes, it's got eyelids and ear holes and no limbs. Really specialized to sand prairies, old fields, and dry open woodlots. Gets its name glass lizard because its tail is easily broken. They use this as a defense mechanism. They can drop that tail, breaking it on a fracture plane. It will wriggle behind them and maybe distract the predator and allow them to escape to live another day. But again, due to loss of habitat, it's listed as a species in greatest need of conservation. The 6-line racer on this beautiful, colorful lizard, long and slender. It's got those 6 longitudinal stripes. Males are brightly colored during breeding season in the spring, and they are sand and hill prairie and rocky open habitat endemics. Pretty common in the Shawnee hills, but rare as you move north in the state to those hill prairies. The eastern fence lizard has these rough scales, wavy bands on the back. It really prefers rocky wooded areas, dry hillsides, and open woodlot. And it's another one that in that southern third of Illinois, it's incredibly common. And next up, we have the skinks, the little brown being the first. It's this drab brown with smooth scales and a dark side stripe. Not to be confused with Plethodontidae salamanders, although they do have kind of the same appearance. Found in southern Illinois forests and is incredibly common. The common five-line skink, you see the bright blue coloration in this juvenile, so really vivid colors that fade as they move into adulthood. But the five lines will be present. Like the glass lizard, especially juveniles will drop that tail, and that bright blue tail wriggling behind them can allow them to escape predation. So they like wooded habitats as well, but also abandoned buildings and trash piles. So it can find it frequently around inhabited areas, and is locally common in the southern third of Illinois. Finally, we have the broad-headed skink, the largest Illinois skink species, very similar in appearance to the five-line skink, although adult males will get that bright orange head coloration, particularly during the breeding season. They like open forest and forest edges. They are arboreal. They'll climb up into trees and hang out in trees, which is very cool. Also locally common in the southern third of Illinois. And now we'll run through the snakes of Illinois. Again, our most speciose group of amphibians and reptiles, 4 families, 38 species, found throughout the state, all kinds of habitats, from very small to very large. And we also have 4 venomous species that we'll touch on. Primarily, we talk about the colubrids. This is kind of this grab bag of snake species, and we have a number of them in the state. First being the scarlet snake, this beautiful red and white banded snake. Slender, brightly banded, likes mixed woodlands with rocky or sandy soils, is semi-fossorial, and is only known in the state from 1 specimen. So perhaps a very restricted distribution, very uncommon to encounter in the state. Alternatively, the racer here is a long, slender, jet black snake with white undersides. It's found in open forest and forage edges near open fields. They're fast, they're agile, they're alert, they're active hunters, really incredible animals. Locally common, especially in the southern Illinois, a third of Illinois, but found throughout the state. The Great Plains rat snake is a large gray to light brown snake with these black bordered blotches, nearly square down the body. Really likes the Mississippi bluff habitats, and that's where you find it. Like many snakes, it's threatened, and a big source of mortality is highway traffic. And so, trying to traverse roads is pretty perilous for a snake. The gray rat snake is a very large, this might be the second most commonly, the snake that I get the second most number of phone calls to remove from property. So large, with a pattern that fades and darkens to black with age. It's found everywhere. It loves farm outbuildings, is a excellent predator of chicken eggs and bird nests, incredible climber, highly arboreal, locally common throughout the state of Illinois. The fox snake, you'll see here, copperhead with reddish brown blotches. This is a prairie and old field specialist in the northern half of Illinois. It can be locally common. Many of you have probably come across fox snakes, especially in the Grand Prairie, and so we see a lot of these in our area. Next to the yellow-bellied king snake, gets its name because it eats other snakes, gray with brown to black blotches. Likes grasslands with high quality remnant prairie to degraded brushy fields. It does avoid ag lands though, and is locally common in southern prairies. Next up is the eastern black king snake. It's this jet black snake with yellow flecking along the back and belly. Again, it's found in the wooded hills, and it's a notorious snake predator, gobbles up other snakes, and is locally common in the Shawnee Hills. This beautiful animal is the eastern milk snake. It's black bordered with red to brown blotches, white belly with black blotches. Really likes rocky wooded hillsides and glades, old fields, and wetlands. It's likely found statewide, but rarely seen. It might be common, but highly secretive. So not something you'll likely encounter, but it is out there. This gorgeous animal is a coach whip. Gets its name from that tail pattern that looks like the handle of a whip, braided whip. Highly variable coloration. You can have these that are dark black with red to pink to brown and all points in between. So incredibly variable. It likes rocky open hillsides, glades, and hill springs. Incredibly fast snake. Moves very quickly, difficult to get your hands on. And it is state endangered, again, threatened by highway traffic. The rough green snake here, it's a long, slender, bright green snake with keeled scales. It's got a rough texture to it. Inhabitants of small trees, bushes, and vines near lakes and streams and along forest edges, locally abundant in southern Illinois. Its sister species in the northern half of the state here is the smooth green snake. So very similar in appearance, but doesn't have those rough-keeled scales. It does like moist prairie remnants, savannas, bogs, marshes, and wet meadows. It's less arboreal than the rough green. One of the things that I like most about the smooth green snake is its defense mechanism is it will actually stand up in the grass and wave like a blade of grass in the breeze to try and avoid predation. But it's fairly rare throughout the state for where it's found in the state. Here's the bull snake. It is a big, beefy, and bold snake species, light yellow to tan base with dark blotches. Inhabits sand prairies, grasslands, and old fields, locally common in extensive central and northwestern counties. These snakes have a ton of personality. They have a keel in their throat. They will hiss, vibrate their tail, and coil up to mimic a rattlesnake, and often fool people with that. So they've got a little bit of attitude. As you can probably tell, it's one of my favorite snake species that we have here in Illinois. Moving from a big beefy snake to a much smaller one, we have the flat-headed snake here. It's a small with a flat, dark head and uniform yellow-brown body. Found in rocky, wooded hillsides, limestone hillsides. Spends a lot of its time underground and is threatened in the state of Illinois. The line snake here has this light mid-back stripes on each side, dark half moons down the mid-belly, inhabits grasslands and urban lots in former prairie under debris. So this is a species that's done pretty well with human populations. It's been able to adapt to be successful in these urban abandoned lots, although it is fairly rare, known from a few scattered localities. The smooth earth snake is next. It's a small olive brown to gray. Inhabits rocky, wooded hillsides, semi-fossorial, nocturnal, rarely seen, really common in the Shawnee Hills and southern Mississippi bluffs. Kirtland snake is next, this small snake with a red or orange belly with black spots down the side. Prairie wetland, wet meadow, grassy edge along waterway specialist. Secretive, nocturnal, listed as threatened in Illinois, but researchers here at the Natural History Survey, I think, are finding them more frequently, and so maybe more common than we thought. We'll start moving into the water snakes here. We've got the Mississippi green, a large stout snake with greenish black or olive to black back and sides. Likes quiet backwater sloughs and cypress tupelo swamps of extreme southern Illinois. Due to that restricted distribution, it's threatened in the state. And you'll see we do have a lot of water snake diversity down in southern Illinois. Plain belly water snake is next. It's this large gray to light brown to unpatterned yellow or orange belly. Likes backwater sloughs and cypress tupelo swamps. And where it's found, it can be quite abundant. Diamondback water snake, actually we'll start with the southern water snake. It's got these broad dark bands over a rusty brown base. Again, another cypress tupelo inhabitant. Endangered in Illinois, only known from Alexander County. That's the only place it's been found so far in the state. Diamondback water snake, on the opposite end of the spectrum, it's a common locally abundant snake. It's got this dark chain-like pattern down its back. Again, like slow and still waters throughout the state, except in the extreme north. Common water snake is one that many of you probably encountered in your time out in the field in our area. It's this large, stout, highly variable colored and patterned water snake. You can find these nearly anywhere where there's water, and they're abundant statewide. Graham's crayfish snake, it's a stout brown to olive snake, still water prairie habitats, extremely secretive, widespread but uncommon. It's another snake species that I've yet to see here in Illinois. The queen snake is a stout brown to olive snake found along rocky woodland streams with abundant crayfish. Uncommon, but can be locally abundant where you find it. Decay's brown snake is another one that many of you have probably seen, often sunning itself on trails in Forest Preserve District lands. Small to dark blotch on either side. This is a woodland prairie generalist and is abundant throughout the state of Illinois. Went the wrong way. We've got the red belly snake next. It's this gray back with this brightly colored red belly. It's a forest and moist woodland and habitat, really likes to eat slugs and earthworms, can be locally abundant, particularly in northern Illinois. The western ribbon snake is next, this long, slender snake with an orange midback stripe that likes to hang out around permanent bodies of water and is incredibly common along the Mississippi River Valley. Next, we'll have these kind of group of garter snake species, the first being the plains, dark with yellow to orange mid-side back stripes, as well as two yellow side stripes. Really likes prairie, field, pastures, wet meadows, marshes, and vacant lots, and really common in the northern half of Illinois. The eastern ribbon snake, on the other hand, it's much thinner but similar in appearance with those stripes, found in lowland forests near cypress and tupelo swamps of extreme southern Illinois. Again, restricted distribution. Habitat specialist, is an endangered species in the state of Illinois. The common garter snake, this is the snake I get the most phone calls to remove from people's yards in Champaign, Urbana. Very common. Mid-back stripe, yellow to gray, often found near water. Very common in urban areas, abundant statewide. Like I said, find them all over Champaign, Urbana with my field assistants. Among the most common snakes in urban environments, at least with my anecdotal data. Got the common worm snake, a really interesting small pink to gray snake species. It's got a spine-like pointed tail that when it feels threatened will poke whatever is delivering the threat. It's rear-fanged, found in rocky wooded areas, and it's abundant along the Mississippi River bluffs in southern Illinois. Ringneck snake, another incredibly common woodland snake species found in hill, prairie, bluffs, and forests. Locally abundant, particularly in the Shawnee Hills and Mississippi bluffs. Got a really bright, beautiful coloration, red, yellow, or orange on the ventral side. Next is the western hognose. It's this stout little snake with an upturned scale that gives it its name at the tip of its rostrum. Santa Prairie Savanna specialist really likes those sandy inhabitants. They're overly dramatic. I'll get back to that in a second. They love to eat toads, and so they've got rear fangs as well that they will use to puncture toads who will inflate themselves as a defense mechanism. So very cool little snake species. It's threatened due to loss of sand prairies, but as I mentioned, a very dramatic snake, and they are known for their death feigning. So when they encounter a threat, they will roll over on their back, they'll gape their mouth open, they'll stick their tongue out, and they will repeatedly do this. So if you flip them back over, they will continue to roll back over in death feign. They'll also regurgitate their latest meal if they happen to have one, which is fairly nasty. So incredibly dramatic little snakes, and I'm a huge fan of our hognose snakes. So next to the eastern hognose snake, couldn't tell you what a typical eastern hognose looks like because incredibly variable patterning and coloration. But again, they've got that upturned tip. They have some of the same dramatic tendencies as the western. They have a preference for forest edge and dry open woods. Can be common in the major sand deposits, but rare in the Grand Prairie. And the last, the colubrids, is the red-bellied mud snake. Absolutely beautiful animal. Large red and black bars in the belly, as you can see here, and then glossy jet black back. Found in shallow ponds, sloughs, and swamps with rotting logs in extreme southern Illinois. They're seldom seen and are listed as a species in greatest need of conservation. And I'm mindful, I'm sorry I've gone over in time, so I'm going to keep plugging away. We'll wrap up with the venomous snakes here. Illinois has 4 viperid species. They all have front-folding fangs, heat-sensing loreal pits, vertical pupils, and are venomous. So first we have the copperhead. You can see where it gets its name from that copper coloration on the head. Tan to copper in color with dark saddles and crossbands. Some people say the best way to recognize those is look for the Hershey kisses down their sides, those dark blotches. They like wooded rocky hillsides and forest edges and rocky wooded areas, locally abundant in the Shawnee Hills and bluffs along the Mississippi River. Next is the cottonmouth, another fairly dramatic snake, large, stout, dark viper whose pattern fades to black over time. Known for its threat display and signature pose that you can see here and flashing that white mouth. Get away from me, I am venomous, I am dangerous. Incredibly abundant in relatively undisturbed cypress tupelo swamps, sloughs, and oxbow lakes of extreme southern Illinois. And I'll touch on that more here in a second. Finally, rounding out the vipers, we have the timber rattlesnake. It's a very large, heavy-bodied rattlesnake species. It's got those black chevrons running down the back of the body, sometimes with an orange stripe as well. They've got a uniformly black tail, and they really like heavy forests around rocky outcrops and bluffs, and they are threatened in Illinois. And finally is the eastern Massasauga, the short, stout rattlesnake with dark blotches on a light body and a very small rattle. It's found in old field, floodplain forests, marshlands, and bogs, and it's heavily associated with terrestrial crayfish burrows. In fact, it overwinters in those crayfish burrows, will hang out there through the winter, and so really needs those sort of wet meadow habitats with those crayfish burrows. They're endangered in Illinois. It's I don't know, in my opinion, really a kind of a tragic situation. Used to be incredibly widespread across the upper 2/3 of the state of Illinois. It's now only known from one locality in the state. And so the conversion to ag, the draining of these wet prairies has really made life difficult for the eastern Massasauga. And subsequently in the last decade, they've been hit really hard by an emerging fungal disease as well. So it's a tough life for an eastern Massasauga rattlesnake in Illinois. We just breezed through a lot of snakes, reptiles, amphibians really quickly. If you want to know more, I can't recommend this field guide enough. My colleagues here at the Natural History Survey put this together, the field guide to the amphibians and reptiles of Illinois. So if you really want to get into greater depth, please seek that out. It's a great piece of work. But I do want to touch before I leave on conservation and restoration of amphibians and reptiles in the state of Illinois. So I've mentioned throughout, the big threats are habitat loss, fragmentation, and degradation. And so, we see those species who are habitat specialists requiring very specific conditions have not done so well. And so a lot of efforts have been undertaken to try and protect these species, but more importantly, restore, enhance, and protect the habitats in which they persist. This is often species specific. So for example, the Blandings turtle, there is a ton of incredible work that's gone on, particularly by the forest districts up around Chicago, to restore and maintain habitat, to build new habitat for these Blandings turtles, to do things like head starting, where they'll bring in clutches of eggs, they'll let them grow up to a certain size that increase their likelihood of survival to adulthood and be able to reproduce. And so this is part of the reason why we have listed species, is because it gives us this sort of poster child for the work that needs to be done to protect them. We see it's often also tied to federally listed species. For example, a lot of work across a number of agencies and organizations, including the Army Corps of Engineers and the Department of Natural Resources, to protect and restore habitat for eastern Massasaugas. So, doing the work you need to do to make sure that invasive plant species don't come in and encroach upon their habitats. So timing of controlled burns and those sorts of things. So really important to protect that habitat. And we see also place-based conservation restoration is extremely effective. We know these species have specific requirements, and if we're able to protect those lands specifically for them, you see not only those species can rebound, but other species that utilize those habitats as well. And so again, we've got some excellent examples with forest preserve districts doing the great work to make sure we've got good habitat. But another one that if you haven't been to Snake Road, I would highly encourage all of you. This image on the right-hand side is from Snake Road. It's a stretch of road in the Shawnee National Forest. They close down every spring and fall for the massive snake migration. You can see all 3 species of tree frog down there, 3 of the 4 venomous snake species, all along the stretch of road. And they have done a ton of incredible work, not just to protect the habitat down there, but also to educate the public about the critical importance of these creatures that I'm devoting my life to protecting as well. So I apologize to everyone. I know I've gone on way too long, but I'll stop now and answer any questions that you might have.
It was really, really enjoyable, Mark. Thank you so much. I think you did cover the entire semester in the 1 hour.
I tried.
We do have a few questions. Like, first of all, the frogs with all those warts on their back, what is the purpose of the warts? Donald wants to know.
That's a great question. The warts are cutaneous poison glands. So those warts are the actual poison glands in the skin that, when punctured, you'll exude that poison out. The predator ostensibly will ingest it, leave a bad taste in their mouth. But yeah, those warts are absolutely, they're called granular glands, and it's those poison glands in the skin.
They won't hurt my hands if I pick them up, though, will they?
No, they won't. You have to puncture them to get the poison out, and you typically have to ingest it to have an effect. So long as you're not eating raw toads, toad sashimi, you'll be fine.
Thank you. Jill has been down to Snake Road in southern Illinois and really enjoyed it. but she understands that maybe the eastern newts don't need an aquatic stage. Is that correct?
That's a great question, and I can't comment on it. I don't know. You know, when I've done surveys down there, absolutely find adults, fully aquatic adults. You know, I suspect that, you know, anything's possible, right? And so this phenomenon that you're talking about is called paedomorphosis. It's the retention of juvenile characteristics into adulthood. And so, for example, tiger salamanders are quite known for this, in fact, where they'll continue and get very large in that larval stage and reach sexual maturity with those juvenile characteristics. So this is certainly not something that's unheard of. It's absolutely possible. It's just not something that I have any knowledge about, which I apologize for.
Oh, that's just fine. Jane Marriott is wondering, as many of us are, about climate change, the impact it's going to have, and specifically, will it bring so many of these southern Illinois species further north?
Yeah, this is a great question, and certainly, again, not unprecedented, right? We've, I think, all heard about the sort of slow creep north of armadillos in Illinois, right? And so they're certainly moving up. We've seen the same thing happen over time with opossums moving into more northern habitats. I think that the challenge that we have with amphibians and reptiles is that, you know, we still have days like tomorrow where we're looking at what, single-digit temperatures. And so, you know, they're tied to being able to find appropriate overwintering habitats. And so they're often restricted to places where they can survive in the winter. They can get down below the frost line. They can avoid freezing. And so being tied to those overwintering habitats presents some particular difficulties. And so to my knowledge, no, we're not seeing the sort of northward creep of any of our amphibians and reptiles. You know, we're not really seeing that expansion. But certainly I think there'd be some good candidates. Top of the list would probably be the and unfortunately to some perhaps would be the cottonmouth, incredibly abundant. And I mentioned Snake Road. If anybody that's been down the Snake Road, they're thick on the ground on Snake Road, the most commonly encountered snake down there. They're really big, beefy, robust snakes, and so, you know, there's corridors for movement for them, so they can move out along floodplains, they can move up through the river channels, and so, you know, they might be a good candidate. Some of the other water snakes down there could be good candidates for moving, those that are tied to the water. But again, to my knowledge, no, there aren't any yet that I'm aware of.
Okay, good. I think Bill had his hand up. Amanda, is it possible for you to unmute him and let him speak?
Sure. I think here. He might have said his piece in the chat.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
But
just,
here,
Then we'll come
wait.
to it. We've
Can
got
you hear
other
me?
questions. Yes, Bill, carry on.
yeah,
Go
I
ahead,
just
Bill.
wanted to, I think that we did a great job on this presentation. I just wanted to point out to you, I think there was a mistake though, on when you were covering the worm snake. I think on the bottom of the worm snake, it's titled as Thamnophis radix.
Yeah.
That's the garter snake. So,
Yep. Sorry about that.
so I just thought I'd tell you that. Great job though.
Thank you.
Wonderful. N. Schreifels wants to know, are all the reptiles and amphibians carnivorous?
No. Many of them are. So certainly all of our snake species are carnivorous. Many of our amphibian species are carnivorous. In fact, most of them are carnivorous. When we get into the turtles, we see some omnivory and some herbivory. And it will also change across life cycles. So, you know, for example, painted turtles are fairly carnivorous as juveniles, but as they age, as they get into adulthood, they'll transition towards omnivory and then into more herbivory. And so you do see some transitions. And certainly some of, you know, our tortoise species are entirely herbivorous. So yes, you do see that in the turtles particularly. There are some herbivorous lizards, not in Illinois. So for the most part, what we have here in Illinois are carnivorous. That's a great question.
Melissa wants to know, what is it that's going on down at the Japan House ponds in Urbana? She has seen spiny softshell and painted and sliders. Are some of those introduced, or have they all just found the pond?
It's a little of both, right? So one thing about turtles is people buy them as pets and they think they're really cute. They don't realize they live for a very long time, and do take some specialized care. And so it's not uncommon for people to quickly tire of having a turtle as a pet and release it in places like Japan House. And so there's certainly some evidence to suggest that there's some introductions that have happened there. But turtles are really good at finding those sorts of habitats. And so, I know that one of the things that I find interesting, my office, I'm actually just situated to the west of Japan House now, over by St. Mary's Cemetery. And I found hatchling snapping turtles out in the parking lot of our building. And so, a snapping turtle that likely was living over at Japan House moved somewhere towards our end of campus to lay its eggs, and then the juveniles were looking for that water. So they are really good at finding those aquatic habitats and moving to them. So it's a combination of both.
Got you. Okay, I think Lincoln is trying to test me here. He wants to know, is pedomorphosis a better term for phenomenon than neoteny?
That's a great question. I've always been told they can generally be used interchangeably. And you'll hear neoteny quite frequently, but pedomorphosis works as well.
So I think that you mentioned that water pollution and restriction of clear water is probably one of the biggest problems in Illinois today. Are there special areas where we can go to find good, clean water, and therefore some of these more particular species?
Yeah, there are some, and certainly as you get down into southern Illinois, where you've got just vast expanses of forest habitat in the Shawnee Hills, that's a great place where there is still some really high quality, cool, fast flowing streams available. The notion is that if we have hellbenders here in Illinois, that's probably where they are. So certainly as you get down into those areas, you do have better opportunities for quality water. But there are also little gems around here. There's some great ephemeral ponds over in Vermilion County in and around Kickapoo, where you can see, there's tremendous salamander diversity over in Kickapoo. A lot of the species that we talked about, both salamanders and amphibians, but also some really interesting snakes as well. So, last year happened to be out there, and there was a big eastern hognose snake that we've encountered out there. So, you find those protected areas, whether it's state protected or other, for habitat. A lot of great opportunities there to see a number of these species. So it's out there. It's just you got to find those protected areas, and there you'll find some of the better water quality and better habitat.
Okay, just a couple more. You mentioned that the red-bellied snake eats worms. I don't know how many of the others, but we're having a problem at the moment that I'm sure you've probably heard of, that Illinois is slowly but surely being infiltrated with jumping worms. And I'm wondering, are our snakes going to protect us from the jumping worms? And can we do anything to actually support the snakes doing this?
It's a great question that I don't know the answer to. I would say that wildlife in general are pretty remarkable in what they're able to do and the things that they're able to persist on. And so, the introduction of a new prey item to the system could certainly be a boon for species that specialize on eating worms and slugs. It's just, how do those opportunities present themselves? How adaptable are the snakes in question? And so it's entirely possible, but I think it remains to be seen.
And we know that the Champaign County Forest Preserve has done some frog call surveys, and they have had some of the master naturalists help them doing this. And I'm wondering, are there other citizen science projects that you can tell us about that we could maybe help?
Yeah, for me, right off the top of the head, it's the Champaign County Forest Preserve frog call surveys. Those are great to help us understand what's happening with the amphibian populations in and around Champaign. I think a couple of folks mentioned up in the chat, there's been a lot of citizen science work with mud puppies as well. And so, having people report finding mud puppies, getting out to help survey for them. So that would be another one. I can't remember who's running that. The name escapes me, but that would be one for sure. But those are the two off the top of my head. That's those.
So maybe you could let us know about the puppies when
I will. Yeah, I
on.
can connect with you when I see the notification.
And I'm so well aware that we have used a large amount of your time. We are very grateful to you for doing this, especially when you just rushed home from Florida today.
Glad my flight made it in time.
Thank you so much, Mark. And please see the thanks that are put in chat to say you did a wonderful job that we all appreciated. Thank you.
Well, I appreciate it. Always like to talk about these things. So y'all have a good night.